Hey guys, it's Sean O'Connell, co-host of the ReelBlend podcast, here to introduce another bonus episode that we are bringing to you guys because we got a really cool interview opportunity. You guys know that we like to showcase up-and-coming directors, and we got a chance to sit down with Ben Sharrock, who has a movie called Limbo that's coming to theaters. It'll be opening on April 30th. This one landed on our radar because Focus Features picked it up, and it has 2 BAFTA nominations and was a dry sort of offbeat comedy, so we definitely wanted to check it out and talk to Ben about his approach to filmmaking. Once we got a chance to see the film, we were really intrigued by a lot of things in terms of like his decision to use different aspect ratios, his approach to comedy, the way that he kind of edited his film to look for comedic elements, and of course getting into major film festivals like Cannes and Toronto, and then having to endure not going to them because of a pandemic. So I think this is a really great conversation you guys should enjoy. This is Ben Sharrock, the director of Limbo. Hey Ben, how are you?
Hi, good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it. How's the day going so far? Pretty good?
Good. Yeah, good. Lots of interviews. I'm in Edinburgh, so it's later here.
But I feel like I know beautiful Scotland after watching your film.
Yeah.
I really feel like I got a sense of it. So we will launch right into the interview. I'll throw it to it as part of the podcast, and so we'll launch right into it. So in your movie, the refugees play a very fun game, which I got a kick out of, which is I used to. And so I would like you to now fill in the second half of that sentence, having now directed your first feature, written and directed your first feature film. I used to what?
Oh, wow. Okay. Oh no.
It's harder when you're doing it, isn't it?
It's hard. I used to speak quite good Arabic, and now I don't.
And now you don't. What happened?
Yeah, I lost it. Just too many years not using it. And, it's like languages, they just go. You work so hard to learn a language, and then if you don't use it, it just goes. Can
you tell me why you were using it in the first place?
Well, so before I went into filmmaking, I studied Arabic and politics, and that was kind of my route into filmmaking, and really connected to making this film as well, because as part of that I spent time living in Syria, studying at Damascus University just before the civil war started. And then from that I ended up specializing in Middle Eastern cinema on the sort of film theory side of things, and then realized that I wanted to be a film director. And then went on to film school after that.
See, Ben, I hope you get back into the language side of it now. I hope that in your free time you start to pick it back up again.
Yeah, I got to use some of it in Limbo, which was good.
I would love for you to elaborate on some of your comedic influences and how they shaped you as you were not just writing this screenplay, but also as you were directing it.
I think it goes back again. It actually goes back to that sort of final year of my Arabic and politics studies, when I was studying Middle Eastern cinema. I came across 2 films in quite quick succession, which were The Band's Visit by Aaron Colleran and The Time That Remains by Elias Suleiman. And those were really the 2 films that kind of made me want to be a film director. And I think what stood out to me was that their use of kind of humor and absurd, and particularly kind of absurdist humor, but when dealing with quite kind of serious subject matter. And it just kind of blew me away, and kind of their filmmaking changed my understanding of what cinema could be. And then I followed that up, and I think since then, but I also felt that it was something that was sort of within me. It was like I understood that humor, I understood that way of making films. It was kind of the way that I would see scenes when I would write them, or that would be the sort of humor that would naturally come out in my writing, right. Not necessarily kind of verbally, but when I'm kind of imagining things in that way. So yeah, I would say those 2 were kind of big influences to me early on.
Well, to that end, the humor in your film, it's not like set up, punchline, unless it's visual. There are some visual punchlines that actually happen in it. So what did the film teach you about editing for comedy? and how to get a good laugh out of the pacing of a scene?
I think it's a good question. I mean, I think it's kind of, it's interesting because it's also, it's a very particular type of comedy. It's a very particular type of humor, and it has this sort of, obviously, it's kind of this absurdist element to it, and the kind of deadpan humor, and it's quite observational. But it's also kind of not necessarily hitting it. I mean, maybe it's where the kind of the word, I guess, offbeat comes from, in that you're deliberately trying to be offbeat. You're not kind of hitting the expected comedy marks. And that was kind of interesting to kind of explore that as well, is that you're sort of not, you're positioning the audience in a way that they're engaging with the film in a different way, that you're not landing the joke when they're expecting it to. You're maybe pushing it a little bit further or making it a little bit longer, because that's also tying into the characters on screen and their experience of being in limbo.
Well, yeah, sure. And not to drill down on this, but I think it's really important to the atmosphere of the film. How is that coaching your actors to get it? Did they get it pretty early on, or was it something you really worked on like day of?
We had a really good rehearsal period, and we had also a really thorough audition process before that. So even from the point of the auditions, we were kind of putting the actors through their paces, and even with the character of Farhad, for example, Vikash went through quite a lot of rounds of auditions, and actually in a sort of later stage, we brought him in to do a half-hour improvised interview in character.
Oh, wow.
To really sort of like, so, and I think that's part of that style of performance as well, is that the actors really have to own that style of performance, that it's not something that feels like they're performing. They have to really be that kind of deadpan, or deliver dialogue in that kind of way, and that being sort of becoming part of them. So yeah, but we had a really good rehearsal process, and we worked very closely. We kind of built really relationships of trust with the actors, and we were then on a remote Scottish island for 6 weeks shooting. So fortunately, we all got on really well, and it was just a really sort of open, collaborative relationship where we were all working towards the same vision, with them really understanding what I was trying to achieve as the writer and the director.
That's awesome. I hope you always get that type of rehearsal period, because I think it's super important and not always afforded. Essential. So that's great that you got it. I want to geek out a bit about aspect ratio choices. I think you're using a 1:33 to 1. It's becoming a very popular format recently. Robin Wright used something very similar to it. Obviously, Zack Snyder is getting a ton of attention for doing Justice League that way. Why did it work for Limbo? Why did you choose it for your film?
Yeah, there's two reasons, and it's also kind of related to sort of how the aspect ratio opens out as well, and kind of when we're thinking about the cinematic language of the film, it's always thinking about that from the point of view of Omar, but also thinking about it from the audience's perspective. It's how the audience are seeing the characters and experiencing the characters' experience on screen. So the Academy aspect ratio, to have that part of the reasoning for that was to create the feeling of Omar and the other characters being trapped on the island, this feeling of the sort of frame closing in on them and that kind of feeling of claustrophobia. But then also it's about how we as the audience are seeing the refugees. So we're deliberately framing the floor and the ceiling in shot, and it's in the Academy aspect ratio. So we're literally putting the refugee characters in a box, and that's sort of how we as the audience are looking at refugees. We're constantly putting them in this box, which is this sort of process of othering.
That's a fascinating way to approach it too, because personally, I thought it was an experience or a choice just to be able to capture as much of the countryside as you could, because I honestly think that Scotland and the landscapes itself that the characters find themselves in is as much of a character as just about anybody else that you wrote as well too, and the aspect allows it to sort of get that point. And there are a lot of times too where you chose to really pull back pretty far, and to show your characters almost getting lost in the atmosphere that they're in. And so I just wanted to ask you personally, like, what do you consider, or what do you want your camera to be in the types of films that you choose? What is your relationship with the camera, and where it is in the action, where you place it?
It's a good question. I mean, I kind of see, I kind of, the way that I think about it, the way that I thought about it more with Limbo was how we're perceiving the characters on screen, and how we're seeing them through the frame. So in that sense, it's almost like the camera and the way that it's lens it's how we're positioning the audience, how we're allowing the audience to see the characters and experience what they're going through, and really sort of carefully piecing that together. So, that's kind of from these wide shots, and by having these kind of wide shots and Omar marginalized in the frame, or very small in the frame, we're seeing Omar as being isolated and alienated and alone on this island, or marginalized. But we're also understanding that that's how he's feeling. So we're seeing it, and we understand that that's what Omar is going through at that point, but that's sort of in small building blocks. So when we keep on doing that throughout the course of the film, that's sort of building that understanding through the cinematic language and through the composition of what Omar's kind of journey is. So then as well, we're going from these wides to these close-up shots, which are on wide lenses, and that means that we're actually shooting, centimeters. Sometimes the actors' faces were in the matte box of the camera. Right. So to go from a wide to that close, where and then also to position the camera where the actor's eye line is just, it's almost at the lens, it's just beyond the matte box. They're looking at the corner of the matte box. Right. So we're looking at them in portrait, and we're kind of building that direct sort of connection between the audience and the characters on screen. And then that playing with that kind of distance and closeness, which is kind of, again, the sort of using the island, the outside, and then using the interiors for the more intimate scenes in a different way.
No, it's incredibly effective, and we're a geeky podcast. If you can't tell, we like to get into the nuts and bolts of the filmmaking process. Like, to that end, when you were doing exteriors, I kind of love that you leaned into the fact that, like, hey, if the wind is whipping, you might be leaning forward to kind of catch what the people are talking about, and you weren't trying to create, like, you're not on a sound stage. You're really leaning into the fact that the island is an element that's just as important to the story.
Yeah. Yeah, and it was also, and it was extremely challenging to shoot there as well. It was, it was really, we were battling against the elements and the weather and on the island constantly. So it was a huge challenge. But to actually make this film on a remote Scottish island, right? It's and we're the first film to ever shoot on this island as well.
Oh, no kidding.
Maybe we'll be the last,
Was it deliberate that the hardest characters to understand were essentially the native characters? Whenever anybody was speaking in thick Scottish accents, those are the ones where I was like, wait, what did he just say? What did they just say?
Yeah. I mean, that's also, I think that was one of those things that was that little bit of kind of like magic that happens as well, where you realize that actually says something, where they're the other as well, like they're other, the other in relation to Omar, and also in relation to global audiences too, and that so it was in the beginning it was like we want to make it true to Scotland, we want them to have the real Scottish accents, and then in the end, it sort of became something else, which is actually really nice.
Ben, I'm curious, is there dialogue, is there slang all on the page, or did you allow some of the actors to throw things in as they went?
It is on the page. It's on the page. Yeah. I mean, I'm from Edinburgh, so I've kind of, although, there's a lot of different like slang depending on where you're from in Scotland. So it's kind of different from Edinburgh to Glasgow, or from, out to the Hebrides where we shot.
Okay.
But most of it, I would say most of it was on the page. I'll give the actors some credit. Maybe they threw some stuff in there.
Very gracious of you. I can't imagine when you started this process that you would have dreamed that you'd be up for the BAFTAs. What was that day like, the nomination coming in? How did that feel?
Oh, it was incredible. It was amazing. I mean, I couldn't watch it, actually. I sort of... They did the live stream where they announced the nominations, and I actually couldn't face watching it because it was just too sort of nerve-wracking, because I think we've also been on quite a long road with this film because of the pandemic, and you kind of have these ups and downs, and like, it was like we got, when you get your premiere, we got the Cannes selection, and that for me was this huge moment, and it was almost like the tension building up to that. And it was a similar thing with the BAFTAs, where you're just so tense because you want the nomination so badly. But I actually took the dog out for a walk and listened to a podcast on fitness to take my mind off it. And then I just waited for my wife, who's also the producer of the film, to call me to let me know if we got the nominations or not.
That's funny that you mentioned that too, about like Cannes and TIFF, these places where in a normal world you'd have been able to go and watch it with a festival audience. It's a little bit bittersweet that it happened at this time when the film couldn't enjoy that run.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's, Cannes and TIFF, they're huge ambitions for me as a filmmaker to have the film at those festivals. So to get in is this kind of incredible thing, and such an honor. But then to not go and kind of experience it and experience the red carpet and watch the film with the audiences there, is definitely bittersweet.
That's okay. Something else to aspire to with the next one, essentially.
Yeah.
I'll get you out of here in this last one. One of the things I loved about the film too is the way that it weaves pop culture references in. But they're not pop culture references in the way that they'll date the film. They're timeless. You mentioned Jerry Maguire and roles like that, and of course, the Ross and Rachel on a break debate. Why is that debate? Why is that topic so? Why does it strike such a chord with people of our generation? We love talking about that story arc on Friends.
I think it's the thing that is. It's so multi-generational, right? Like, I think that, I have cousins that are 16 and 18, and they've watched all of Friends, and they know everything about it. And it's like, I was watching Friends when I was 16 to 18, or I think. And yeah, so it's something that's multi-generation, but also global. I've traveled all over the world, and everyone knows Friends, and everyone knows the relationship between Ross and Rachel, and it just comes up in conversation. Were they on a break? I was in Syria. People are talking about whether Ross and Rachel were on a break.
I can't imagine even the people who were like the showrunners on the television show at that time knew the longevity that conversation would have. But man, I'm telling you, you're like you said, it's global. It's everywhere at this point. So. Ben, I appreciate all your time, man. Honestly, continued success with the film. And I can't wait to see what you do next. I appreciate you joining ReelBlend.
Thank you so much. Pleasure talking to you.
We want to thank Focus Features for giving us time with Ben, and of course thank Ben for stopping by the show. It's an intriguing movie. I definitely want you guys to check it out. It reminds me a little bit of, and while I'm not trying to lump his comedy into this type of style, but if you like Wes Anderson and the offbeat way that he delivers very dry comedy, very dry humor that's sort of visually driven and also paced in a specific way, I think you're going to understand why Limbo sort of checks those boxes and hit me on that level. Again, you can look for the movie in theaters on April 30th, and we should have a review on the full ReelBlend show very quickly. So make sure if you're on our YouTube page right now, you hit subscribe and turn on your notifications. And if you're listening to us where you get your podcast needs met, make sure that you follow along for ReelBlend for the latest content from the show.